Welcome, everybody. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Here
Glad to have you all here. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to all of you attending out there for the Dallas City Council District 14 Candidate Forum. I'm Jeff Kittner with the North Dallas Chamber. Normally, we would be hosting these in person, but due to COVID-19, we've shifted to offering these candidate forums virtually. Thank you all for your patience as we try to avoid any technical difficulties. As many of you all know, this is the fourth forum that we have done this cycle, and appreciate you all participating. As I think everybody knows, early voting has started. You can vote at any early voting location in Dallas County, and so make sure you go out and vote. Thanks to both Mr. Blewett and Mr. Ridley for being here today and running for this important office. We're privileged to have you both here today. And before we get started and go over the rules, I want to recognize all of our co-sponsors. Of course, the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce, the League of Women Voters of Dallas, the Dallas Breakfast Group, Friends of Dallas Public Library, you heard from Mary Wolonsky earlier, Faith Commons, Hotel Association of North Texas, People Newspapers, and Downtown Dallas Inc. And you all heard from Scott Goldstein as well just a couple minutes ago. District 14, a little bit of information about the district. It's an unusually shaped district containing portions of East Dallas, Lower Greenville, Turtle Creek, Oak Lawn, Uptown, Downtown, and more. In the general election earlier this month, 8,937 people voted in District 14. That was the second highest voter turnout in the city besides District 13. And each of these candidates here today individually received more votes than the total number of people who voted in each of District 5, District 6, District 7, and District 8. Let me go over the rules real quick. These have been provided to the candidates, but just to let you all know what we're doing, we'll be using ballot order as the sequence. So Mr. Ridley will start and then Mr. Blewett, and then we'll alternate back and forth for the first response to each question. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Following opening statements, we'll have a series of moderator and audience questions, and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to those questions. If you see me, I'll be on mute, but if you see me unmute, that means your 1 minute time is up. And audience members, if you have a question, please post it in the chat. For any question to be considered, it must be asked to all candidates. So with that, we're going to get started. And Mr. Ridley, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jeff, for moderating this forum today and for the Chamber and its co-hosts for putting on this forum. Experience matters in city council elections. I am the experienced, effective leader that this district needs now. That experience is composed of over 30 years of professional work experience in the fields of architecture, urban planning, and law. I have practiced in Dallas most of that time, over 30 years, as an attorney specializing in the construction and development field. In addition to that professional work experience, I have served on 2 city commissions, the Landmark Commission, helping to preserve our historic buildings and neighborhoods, and on the Plan Commission for 8 years. The Plan Commission was a tremendous educational experience. I learned much about how city government functions, the roles of different city departments, particularly as it relates to the development process. I also met many of the neighborhood leaders in District 14, as well as business leaders and developers who are interested in bringing more people and more jobs to District 14. In addition, I have extensive nonprofit experience. I've served on the board of the Greater Dallas Planning Council, a civic organization that has been in Dallas since 1946. I've also served recently for 2 years as its president and expanded its role both in terms of membership and in terms of its services to the Dallas region. It is particularly critical that District 14 have a leader that is experienced with zoning and development. When I served on the Plan Commission for those 8 years, we consistently had more development and more rezonings occurring in District 14 than any other district in the city. And I attribute that to the desirability of our district. We have some of the best neighborhoods in Dallas. We have some wonderful parks. We have some wonderful arts organizations, libraries, all the kinds of assets that attract people to move to a particular location. That is the good side of the attractiveness of the district. But because of that attractiveness, we have to cope with the issues arising from growing population and growing development. And that's what I have deep experience in, balancing the needs of sensible development with neighborhood advocacy.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley. Mr. Blewett, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the ability to be here today. I appreciate Mr. Ridley being here. I appreciate the chamber and all of your partners. So this is good. We haven't had a lot of debates during the runoff, so this is going to be helpful for the community. You know, this election is going to be decided on the issue of public safety. When Mr. Ridley talks about, you know, urban planning or zoning, that is an aspect of the job, but it's about 10% of the job. It's actually a lot more complex than that, and it's kind of an ecosystem that we need to think about. Public safety feeds into economic development, which feeds into quality of life issues, which feeds into people being able to build their lives here. So it's all interrelated. And I would say that since we replaced Mr. Ridley on the Plan Commission with a new Plan Commissioner who has done a great job, Wayne Garcia has had great outreach with the community. He's more in touch with affordable housing and some of the things that we're trying to do over here than his predecessor. And last year we did $1 billion in new development, and that money turns into extra tax dollars, which turns into additional revenue for public safety, which allows us to build the quality of life issues that people will want to stay here and build their lives, like I said. So I focus quite a bit on the whole ecosystem, not just one aspect of it. And economic development is the key to the future of this city. And it is intimately involved with public safety. They're the same thing. You can't have economic development without good public safety. So, you know, recently it's pretty simple. The Dallas Police Association has endorsed me. They agree with my view of the future of public safety, street racing, street takeovers. They agree with my philosophy on how we're going to address all this. And then, and like I said, on the economic development side, the proof's in the pudding. We have actually been approving lots of projects, sensitive development, sensitive to the needs of the surrounding areas. I think very hard about how we can reasonably grow. Because if you look around the district, what you see is the people that are moving in are in their 30s and their 40s. They're younger people, family formation. This district's getting younger faster. And they want good public schools. They want connected neighborhoods. They want bike trails. They want activities at their parks more than just a park, green space. So there's a lot of things that go into building this district as the most important district in the city for economic development, for growth, and for the future of the city. So it's a complex ecosystem. I focus on the whole thing, and I look forward to serving for 2 more years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blewett. The first question will go to you, and it's on public safety.
Sure.
The largest portion of the city's budget is dedicated to public safety.
Mhm.
What do you think is the most effective and fiscally responsible strategy to improve public safety for the residents of District 14? And do you think public safety is funded at the correct level, or would you seek to either increase or decrease funding allocated to public safety? And you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, it's a great question, but it's kind of complex. The easiest thing we can do is hire 500-600 officers, which we are short. If you go back 5 or 6 years, we used to have 3,700 officers. Now we have 3,000-ish. The population has grown, so we are light on officers. 83% of our public safety budget for police anyway is personnel. So the budget will be tied to being able to hire new officers. That goes to increasing the academy. We're only running 25 people through the academy right now instead of 50. The attrition rate is high. The number one thing we need to do is hire more officers so that when people call 911, they get a response from an officer when they need it. That is the number one thing that we need to do. Secondary to that is the 911 call center. We are understaffed. It is fully funded, but we're only running about 70 call takers. We need to have about 100. That's what we're budgeted for. So when people call in and they're on hold times or calls get dropped, that's unacceptable. It's all one big thing where you call 911, you get an operator, and you get an officer when you need one. And the top line number of officers is the most important thing we must address.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blewett. Mr. Ridley, same question.
With regard to public safety, I believe in giving the police the necessary resources to combat crime in our neighborhoods and our city. In addition to that, though, I believe that we need to reform the police department in some significant ways. For example, we need to make them more effective and more efficient in fighting crime. One of the principal ways that we can do that is by transferring some primary responsibilities that they currently have in areas that they have little expertise in to other agencies. That would include dealing with the homeless and also dealing with mental health crises. This takes a lot of time on the police department's hands, and it draws them away from serious and violent crime fighting. If we transfer those kinds of responsibilities to social service agencies, that will be an opportunity to better deal with those crises type situations and allow social service workers who are better adapted to deal with those situations than the police are. And it will also prevent an opportunity for interactions with the police that can turn violent because they're not used to dealing with mental health crises. I also believe that we should continue hiring the police force as we need to. We also need to continue civilianizing our police desk jobs so that we can get currently serving peace officers out onto the street fighting crime that they've been trained to do rather than shuffling paper that civilians can do.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley. All right, next question, we'll start with Mr. Ridley. It's on homelessness and housing security. Those continue to be a challenge for the city. Often, instead of a comprehensive solution, the strategy seems to be replacing relocating homeless encampments. What is your strategy to help resolve the city's challenges here? And you'll have 1 minute to respond.
It is currently a disaster in the city, the way that we treat the homeless. The city's efforts to relocate them, particularly in the dead of winter, rather than house them in warm facilities, was just cruel. We need to stop that because it deprives the homeless of all of their worldly possessions, what little they have. It separates them from the caseworkers who, after the relocation, can't find them anymore to serve them. What we need to do is to better support our nonprofit partners in the city, such as the Salvation Army, Our Calling, the Stew Pot. There are numerous nonprofits that have expertise and experience dealing with the needs of the homeless. We also need to provide for temporary and permanent supportive housing for the homeless with the effort to teach them the skills needed to obtain employment, to obtain housing on their own, and to make them truly independent again. That won't be possible with all of them, but a significant number can be made independent again. And that's the ultimate solution to the homeless problem.
Thank you. Mr. Blewett, same question for you, 1 minute.
Yes, sir. The homeless solutions used to be called crisis intervention because, quite frankly, a lot of them that are what we call homeless are not really homeless. They're dealing with addiction, mental issues, domestic violence, and economic dislocation. The first thing that we should do is have an accurate census of what the actual problem is with our homeless population to accurately address what their issue is. You know, I often say words matter. And the idea is if we could give all of these people a home, would that solve their problem? And we all know the answer. The answer is we have to correctly identify what the root cause is. That goes to what we're doing with something called Right Care. We partner police officers with mental health professionals where we go out and we identify people who need mental health as opposed to just getting put into the police system. We're going to be accurately finding out how we can address specific problems rather than just treat the symptoms. And I think that's what we do right now. We treat the symptoms. We do homeless encampment resolutions, and then they pop up a week or two later in the exact same place. This is not working. We're spending significant dollars on it. We all know the problem is growing, and we're going to have to accurately identify what it is before we can specifically offer them wraparound services that help those that are transitional homeless to get off the streets. And the ones that are chronic, the ones that have significant structural issues, you know, we're going to have to offer them solutions as well that are very different. And that's something we have to think about is different solutions for different people that are on the streets homeless.
Thank you very much. Mr. Blewett, next question for you. Dallas continues to be a vibrant economic city with major companies like Jacobs and Uber choosing to relocate here. While we have a great story, proactive economic development for the city sometimes gets overlooked in favor of what's best for the North Texas region. What are some specific policies that you would recommend be implemented to generate proactive economic development for our city?
Well, the first thing is what we did this week is we passed an economic development plan, a comprehensive economic plan, which addresses in a large way the divide between the North and the South, because everyone knows that 15% of our property values are south of I-30 and 85% are north. And in District 14, that affects us because we have lots of development that happens in Uptown and in our neighborhoods, and it creates traffic and density issues. And the reliever for us is to grow south of 30. There's lots of land, lots of opportunity. So I'm very optimistic on the economic development plan. On the economic development committee, I'm vice chair. I reach out all the time for corporate relos and try and encourage them on what it is that we offer. The sales pitch is the city of Dallas, not the Dallas area. I take it very personal when companies say they're relocating to the Dallas area, the regional area, when I focus on Dallas. The city of Dallas is who we represent. It's who we want to have companies move into our areas. So I focus on that through the plan. And then for me, honestly, it's demographics. Younger people move here, they live in the apartments and multifamilies, and then they get married, have 2.3 kids, and a lot of them.
Mr. Blue, I'm sorry. I've done that before. I accidentally muted you instead of unmuting myself.
Well,
so please go ahead.
My last sentence was just going to be that the way for the future in economic development is a continual process of younger people moving here into the multifamily apartments, getting married, buying houses, having kids, going to the local schools, safe neighborhoods, and staying here. That's how we grow our population. That's how our economy grows.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ridley, same question.
We have had a very undisciplined approach in the past to economic development in the city. By that, I mean that we haven't developed criteria and a process by which to consider giving incentives to businesses to locate in different parts of the city. Fortunately, I have seen that the city has passed an economic development policy this week. It's something I've been calling for at least 2 months on the campaign trail, that we have a coherent policy to weigh when we give economic incentives, when they're necessary to obtain relocations, and provide criteria by which those incentives will pay off in terms of jobs that pay a good wage, that are located in places of the city that have been underinvested in, so that we're not just handing out money that goes to rich corporations that would locate here anyway. We need to incentivize where it will have an effect on creating jobs, particularly in the southern sector. That is something that I want to focus on that has been not very successful in the city to date, because we have been misdirecting our efforts in places where it isn't needed instead of in places where it is needed.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley. All right, next question, we'll start with you. Parks, trails, libraries, and cultural affairs are what Councilmember Lee Kleinman refers to as the Ministry of Happiness. These are all citizen-facing departments whose budgets, unfortunately, are often the first to get cut during the budgeting process. How will you balance the needs of these important city services compared to other city needs? And Mr. Ridley, you'll go first.
Well, our first important priority has to be public safety, of course. Fortunately, our city has not been adversely affected budget-wise by the pandemic. And so we're not in a situation like we were in the recession 10 years ago, where we were faced with severe and deep budget cuts, particularly to our social programs and our quality of life expenditures. I think as a result that we can adequately support public safety as well as our quality of life programs, which after all are what draw people to our district and to our city. The ability of access to quality libraries, to parks. We have a wonderful group of parks in our District 14. And that's one of the things that I have talked about frequently in my campaign, is preserving and protecting our neighborhood parks. And so I think that we can accomplish both of those objectives with our current resources.
Thank you very much. Mr. Blewett.
Yeah, District 14 is very fortunate with the parks that we have, and our park board representative, Amanda Scholes, who has been a great advocate. She's a pollinator person, she's a bee person, she's very involved in the parks and has been a great asset for the district. So I focus on that quite a bit because there's three silos that basically make up our job. It is public safety, infrastructure, and then quality of life. So we can touch on the importance of public safety. It's 60% of our budget. That tells you how important it is. Infrastructure, we need billions of dollars. I'm sure you're going to have a question about that, so I'll move past it. And quality of life is why people decide they want to live in the city, and it's why they decide to stay. So I focus, again, on young families, younger people moving here, giving them the quality of life issues that they want and that they're going to get. My argument is if we don't offer it in District 14, if we don't offer it to our new residents who've come here excited, and then they get a little older and they see what's happening in some of our suburban friends and the offerings that they're presenting, we are in a true competitive cage match with our surrounding areas on quality of life issues. We simply have to provide parks, trails, amenities at parks, not just parks, but water features. And if you look at the modern parks and what we have, they're not just green space, they're active. They're activated parks, they connect neighborhoods. I love the idea of connecting uptown to downtown through the Clyde Warren Park. I love the idea of connecting the Arts District and East Downtown with Deep Ellum through the new Carpenter Park and dropping I-345. These are exciting things for me, exciting things for the next generation, and it's how we get them to stay here and build their lives.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Blewett, we'll start with you for the next question. A large portion of your time on City Council will be spent responding to constituent inquiries and questions. If elected, or in your case, re-elected, how will you manage constituent concerns during your time in office? You'll have 1 minute.
Well, that's kind of a setup question because I had Connie Sanchez, who has been the District 14 liaison for 26 years, and she retired in January. Now, we replaced her with somebody else, Max Sanchez, who's done a great job. But Connie was worth about 2 or 3 people, and everybody in District 14 loved her. She promised she'd stay with me for my first term, but COVID was really challenging. And I can tell you in 2020, our office handled, touched, resolved 32,000 service requests. Now, I can't tell you specifically the number of districts that were close to us, but I'm pretty confident that we were #1 with the number of service requests because we have a very complex district. And we will continue to do that. So my staff is great. They know the system. We get hundreds of emails every day. We respond all the time. We follow up with the department heads. It is a massive undertaking in District 14. We have an efficient system for handling it, and we will continue to do that. So yeah, we miss Connie Sanchez, and we will grow up Max to get us there. We only get 2 staffers, no matter how many service requests we get. But we run a tight ship, and we respond to all of our constituent requests as best we can, given the resources that we have with the city.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ridley, same question.
Well, in addition to responding to specific concerns of citizens, one of the innovations that I want to adopt when I'm elected is to communicate regularly through newsletters to my constituents. That's something that's not being done in District 14 now, and which Jennifer Gates did very effectively in her district in her last term. I got on her mailing list and I learned much during the pandemic about the city's efforts to cope with that, about the freeze apocalypse in February, all from newsletters that she sent out to her constituents that I wasn't receiving from our current District 14 councilman. That's something that I will put on as a priority to communicate on a regular basis so that people know what's going on at City Hall, what the news is that affects their lives from city government, so that we can actually perhaps reduce many of the communications that are one-on-one because we keep them generally well informed in our district.
Thank you very much. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Ridley. Illegal street racing has been an ongoing challenge for the city of Dallas. Various groups, including our chamber, have worked with our state representatives on implementing harsher penalties for this illegal activity. What strategies would you recommend be implemented to curtail these dangerous activities?
Well, Jeff, I have been talking about this issue for the last 3 months on the campaign trail, and I have a multi-point plan to address it. First, we need better intelligence. We need to have a Dallas officer who on the most critical nights of the week, usually the weekend nights, is dedicated to monitoring social media by which the street racers communicate where they're going to be and when they're going to be. That will enable us to dispatch patrol cars to those locations to either beat the street racers there and with their presence deter them from racing, or to catch them in the act. Currently, our 911 response system is so slow that by the time a citizen calls and we dispatch an officer, the racers have gone. They know they can't stay in one place very long. Secondly, I would strictly enforce our traffic laws and arrest people who are committing reckless acts on our streets. And thirdly, I would impound their vehicles, because without these race type vehicles, there wouldn't be any street racing. And if someone is deprived of the use of their vehicle in Dallas for 30 to 60 days, they'll think twice about street racing again. And finally, I would explore engineering solutions with traffic buttons in major intersections and barricades, as we've tried on a trial basis in downtown.
Thank you. Mr. Blewett, same question.
First, I'll address Mr. Ridley's comment about information. I have a Friday newsletter that we send out to district leaders, and I'm happy to add his email to that distribution. So we do that, and I'm sorry that he hasn't been informed, but every Friday we send out a newsletter, and I'm happy to include you. His comments about speed racing and street takeovers, we already have social media officers that follow. It's called the Fusion Center. Perhaps he's never heard of it, but we already pre-position officers. We track these guys online. It's called the Fusion Center. The 911 call center, like I said, we are understaffed, and it's a real issue. On one given night about a month or so ago, we got 6,000 calls because a bunch of thousands of these street racers came into town, and our 911 call takers couldn't keep up. Fully funding the 911 call center plays a big role in being able to respond to this. The number of officers being short, 600 officers, means even if you call 911 and want to have the officers get there, if we don't have enough officers on the street, it just isn't going to get there. Last May on council, I voted and supported to raise the priority call on street racing from priority 4 to priority 2. We already impound cars. Perhaps he doesn't know that, but I sent out in my newsletter the statistics recently on the number of tickets, citations, impounds that we've already done. Chief Garcia, our fairly new police chief, is very aggressive on this. We have been spending a lot of time and man hours on the street racing task force, which I've been out with. I've also been out in the DPD helicopter, Air One, to see how the task force interacts with the street racers when they come in. I'm very much aware of what we're doing here. I'm very much involved in pushing DPD and the task force to addressing this. We're making progress, and the issues that he brought up, most of them, we're already doing it.
Thank you very much. Next question, Mr. Blewett, we'll start with you. Short-term rentals can create both cultural and economic value for entrepreneurs and small businesses throughout the city. Yet there's also been a recent push to regulate these. What is your position on any regulations or ordinances that would restrict the operation of short-term rentals in the city?
I began at the city council level. I began this process a year and a half ago to direct staff to study other markets and come up with a regulatory scheme, or perhaps even a zoning scheme that would address this. I had a task force created. I appointed myself to the task force along with Ms. Paula Blackman from District 9 and other stakeholders and leaders. We came up with a bunch of policy proposals that were presented back in February. There were 7 proposals. After that, in March, we went back to our legal team and asked for zoning options to be added to it. So we pursued the legal aspect. Just a week or two ago, I made a motion at the Quality of Life Committee to actually refer to staff to take those proposals and begin to craft a staff-led ordinance with our input, because they have all the data points. So it will begin the process over the next 6 months or so of putting it together. That's the fastest we're going to be able to get an ordinance begun with staff and council interaction. And I plan on being heavily involved in those line items. And also part of that process could involve zoning, but that will take years through ZOAC, through the CPC, through a lot of interaction with communities, with groups. So the fastest way to help the most amount of people is to introduce a regulatory scheme that will address the party houses, which most people agree are the most important thing that we can address the fastest.
Thank you. Mr. Ridley, same question.
Short-term rentals present several problems for the city. First of all, most of them are unregistered. 2/3 don't register with the city, and so they don't pay the hotel taxes that they're required to pay. That's a problem that we need to address. We also need to address the party house syndrome. That's where people rent their houses, usually as absentee landlords, to people who come in and invite their 40 best friends to have a big party on a Saturday night. That's disrupting neighborhoods, and it's lowering property values of the neighbors. So I would be an advocate for strong regulation of short-term rentals. And I believe that we should restrict them to 30-day occupancies or longer to prevent the worst effects, which include depriving our city of affordable housing. If these units are being used to house transient people who are just there for the weekend, then they're not available to solve our great need for affordable housing in our city. If we restrict it to 30 days or longer, then we're really addressing the housing problem.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley. Next question will be for you. Although the city doesn't have official oversight over either DISD or Dallas College, a collaborative relationship between the cities and these entities is important. What do you view as the city's role relative to DISD, Dallas College, and education in the city of Dallas?
Well, you're correct, of course, that the city doesn't have any direct control over either educational institution. But what we can do is use our bully pulpit to stress the importance of strong curriculum programs in our schools and support the efforts of the Board of Trustees of DISD and Dallas College in coordinating their efforts. We have programs that are college prep and also trade type programs in our high schools that can lead into the curriculum in our Dallas College campuses. And so that's one thing that we can help to coordinate, is to inform these school districts what kinds of workforce skills we need in Dallas to support our economic development efforts. We can also increase the available housing in our district so that we can actually put more children into the schools, which adds to the tax base that's available to the school district and also increases their state aid on a per capita per child basis.
Thank you. Mr. Blewett, same question.
Well, if you know much about me, it's kind of an unfair question because I have 7 children and all of them have gone through DISD schools. I actually have 2 in college right now, so I'm short-staffed. I only have 5 kids at home. And I'm not the smartest guy because my youngest is going to kindergarten next year. So that's kind of the idea of the spread. So I put my money where my mouth is. For decades, I have been on dad's clubs. I am on the SBDM, site-based decision, over at Mockingbird Elementary. My wife is on the SBDM for Woodrow Wilson High School on the east side. We understand the value of public education, and our public education, our schools. It's what allowed us to build our life here. And it's one of the biggest reasons why I'm running for council again, is so that I can ensure that the next generation has the same opportunities that we had: safe neighborhoods, good schools, high quality of life. The biggest thing I can do at the city level is what I've done. My predecessor, for 2 years, when I was on the SBDM at Mockingbird Elementary, we tried to get lit up crosswalks across Matilda Avenue because 30% of that school's kids came from west of Matilda and tried to walk or ride their bikes to school. We were told we couldn't get one. 3 months after I was elected, we had a lit up crosswalk across Matilda because it was a priority to me. If you notice, we have a lit up crosswalk at Skillman at TC Park because I saw young families trying to cross Skillman and it was dangerous. If you see a new lit up crosswalk by the Lakewood Library, I can put in crosswalks, good pedestrian amenities so that our kids, our families can safely get to schools. It's one of the most important things we can do on council, is to allow children and families to safely get to school. And then the bully pulpit. It is important, and that's why I say I put my money where my mouth is. It's not just that my kids use public school. It's that they've successfully navigated DISD, and I have 2 in college with scholarship money that are performing very well because DISD worked for us, and we make sure that it works for the next generation.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Blewett. Although it's improving, Dallas has a reputation as a city which is not always bicycle and pedestrian friendly, or it's too focused on prioritizing car mobility and infrastructure. What would you do to support increased and safe mobility for pedestrians and bicyclists?
Well, I've already touched on the pedestrian aspect, and for me, we have a District 14 crosswalk plan. We restripe, and we're putting in flashing crosswalks wherever we can, entertainment, schools, libraries, like I mentioned. So the pedestrian aspect, I'm working on it very hard. It's very important to me. The next generation, you see it all over the place. Young families, moms with strollers trying to walk across these different streets. And so it's very important to me. The easiest example also is Richmond Avenue over here in East Dallas. We've just gone through a design process where we had 44 feet of available road, trying to figure out how we can slow the lanes down, how we can add bicycle and pedestrian amenities. We didn't have the ability to do it in a perfect way because the road wasn't wide enough. And working with the community, working with staff, and trying to be bicycle friendly, safe bicycle friendly, we crafted a solution where it's not perfect, but it is a truly protected bike lane east-west through East Dallas, from Abrams all the way to Matilda, almost to Greenville. And it will be protected by a buffer, by a parking lane buffer and an additional buffer. So it's truly protected bike lanes as a pilot program. And if this works, we will be able to do this in other streets where you don't have the width to do it on both sides, but you can at least put one in. I really believe that to really get bicycle lanes used, they have to have that buffer. You can't just have a 4-inch piece of paint between a travel lane and a bike lane. It's too dangerous. People won't use it. So we're going to have to figure out how to use these buffers. This pilot program on Richmond, I'm very excited about it. I'm optimistic. And if it works, we're going to do it in other places, because the future of our city is, we all know it, 20, 40 years from now, cars are going to be less important, and we've got to start transitioning.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ridley, same question.
The city has recently adopted its strategic mobility plan, which contains many recommendations pertaining to micromobility. That includes bicycling, scooters, and also pedestrian access. That's something that I will follow through on and implement the recommendations of that plan. But more specifically, with regard to bikes, the city adopted a bike plan in 2011, which calls for an ultimate build out of 1,300 miles of bike paths and trails throughout the city. That, in conjunction with the Circle Trail effort to link all of those trails around the city, is going to be a tremendous boon to navigating the city via bike as an alternative to using motor vehicles everywhere we have to go. I strongly support the use of biking as not only recreational, but as transportation. Many people like to commute to work on their bikes or to go shopping. We ought to have the facilities to enable them to do that. Another important initiative is the sidewalk survey that the city has recently commissioned to survey the condition of our sidewalks. We have, particularly in our older neighborhoods, a lot of heaved, unnavigable sidewalks. We need to invest in improving the path of travel for our pedestrians.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Ridley. The Texas legislative session concludes next week. What do you see as any advantages or disadvantages of bills passed in the Texas legislature this session, particularly on those which might preempt municipal autonomy?
Well, that is a key issue that has been facing our city for several years now, is that the state legislature, the leaders in particular, are attempting to intervene in what should be purely local issues. And they're doing that on a number of levels, in instances where the city government, particularly a home rule city like Dallas, is much closer to its residents, knows better what their needs are. And we don't need that kind of interference from the state. I'm very concerned about some legislative initiatives at the state level. For example, their attempts to restrict people's rights to vote and where they can vote. I'm also in favor of a couple of the legislative initiatives that are coming out of the session. One is to allow historic districts to preserve their tax rates, their tax appraisal values in light of adjacent higher density development. Currently, the appraisal district doesn't consider the fact that you're in an historic district and your house can't be torn down and replaced with a modern, new, much more expensive home. So they value the land at that higher land price of adjoining areas. This bill would stop that and allow that fact of historic district location to be considered. So that's one of the things that I think they're doing right in Austin.
Thank you. Mr. Blewett, same question.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think quite a bit about. I do believe that we at the local level are most in touch with our residents and our neighborhoods. And so I'm not in favor at all when Austin overreaches and gets involved in what should be our business. And in terms of specifics of legislation, I appreciate Mr. Ridley bringing that up, because I actually went to Austin and I testified on that bill in favor of it, because in our district, we have a significant number of historic neighborhoods that are being unfairly taxed in terms of land use. And what this bill will allow us to do, or allow them to do, is designate their house, because of the restrictions, will allow them to use that as a factor in the appraisal value. That's a real benefit. It's a start. It's not the end, but it's a start of being able to fairly value historic neighborhoods instead of being overvalued based on adjacent neighborhoods. So I was happy to be able to go down there and testify. I was happy that it moved out of committee and passed and so legislation. So I'm very optimistic about where that's headed. And everything else that we do talk about, when I told the Legislative Affairs Committee what my priorities were, it did go back to my first point. I do believe we're the closest and best to be able to represent our neighborhoods. So when we talk about building materials and restrictions, property taxes, things that they tell us that we can't do, I'm against it. And I very much want to overturn some of the things that they've already done.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Blewett. What are some projects you've worked on for the city that you're particularly proud of? Something where you can point to, where you feel like you've made a difference to make the city of Dallas a better place for its citizens?
Wow. I get asked that question, especially in light of COVID, because since March of last year, we've been reactive to a whole variety of things, including a storm that wasn't COVID related, but it was very disruptive to city services. There were a number of things that I was working on that I was very optimistic on. The most exciting thing that I was working on was an integrated traffic synchronization plan. I had found that we could use environmental aspects, the idea of a heat map, idling trucks and cars to get federal funds, to get COG funds, to basically use their money, hundreds of millions of dollars, to be able to upgrade all of our traffic signals, synchronize them, and it would be great for traffic, great for heat, great for the environment, great for a lot of things, and we finally would have had the money to do it. So we were making great progress on that until COVID came along and changed it. Other than that, things that I get to work on mainly are big development projects that come through that we've passed that have been good for the city's tax base, good amenities for specific neighborhoods. So those are positives. And the biggest thing that we're gonna have to do is budget related. We are very fortunate that our budget has come back, that we're able to we don't have to make the cuts that we thought we'd have to make. And so we're gonna be doing much better than other big cities. And you'll see that at next budget. And my priorities will be on public safety, infrastructure, and quality of life.
Thank you. Mr. Ridley, same question.
One of the biggest problems that our city has and has had for a number of years now is a lack of affordable workforce housing. I was one of the first to recognize that problem amongst public officials 6 years ago while serving on the Plan Commission. And I did something about it. I started asking developers to provide a certain percentage of units in their new luxury apartment buildings for which they were seeking higher zoning to give back to the city a certain percentage of affordable units that would be available for rent to people who are employed as civil servants, police, fire, and educators who make moderate salaries but give back to the city through the public service that they perform for our community. In addition, I also, while serving on the Plan Commission, took a strong stand to protect neighborhoods against gas drilling, prohibiting it from within 1,500 feet of any residential neighborhood. I also saw through the creation of an ordinance that would ban this kind of gas drilling in areas in public parks and in our floodplains to avoid potential climate, pollution disasters. And thirdly, I can point to my involvement in helping to author and advocate the adoption of the Parkland Dedication Ordinance, by which developers of residential units from single family to high rise have to give back a certain percentage of their land in order to allow the city to develop parkland to serve those new residents.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go to some audience questions now. We've got quite a few, and I'll try to get to several of them. But the first one is from Andrew Kraus with Congressman Colin Allred's office. Andrew wants to know, in terms of DART and public transit, do you prioritize coverage or ridership? And please explain why. And we'll start with Mr. Ritter.
Well, this has particular implications for our DART Zoom program that has been going on for over a year now with DART in their efforts to revamp our bus system. And they conducted a survey of Dallas area residents as to whether they preferred increased coverage or increased service frequency. And that is an issue that we can't have all and none of the other. It has to be a balance between those two. I think that coverage is an important issue as long as it's coverage in the right places. It has to be coordinated with our light rail system so that we have service crosstown that isn't provided by the light rail system. So coverage is very important, but so is frequency of service, so that we don't have people waiting an hour for a bus. So it has to be a compromise between those two.
Thank you. Mr. Blewett, same question about DART.
Yeah, we've been briefed on this a number of times, and it's a distinction that you bring up, and it is, I've decided that ridership is the most important thing. Our city is 383 square miles. It's a massive land area to cover. And the idea of using DART buses to cover it all is just, it's not practical. It doesn't work. And so the idea of focusing on ridership, of channels, of areas where we can have more concentration, more riders on the actual bus lines is really important to me, because we have to provide for our citizens a way for them to get from home to work, especially in this environment. So ridership is number one for me. I focus quite a bit on how DART is going to help the future. I mean, right now we've got this D2 line coming through District 14. There's been a lot of talk about it for a decade or so, and we're getting closer to figuring out what that's going to look like in terms of integrating the rail lines. On the east side, I really much focus on I-345, Carpenter Park, and where that DART line will pop up, because if it pops up in the middle of that park of Deep Ellum, it will restrict our future in terms of the development that we can do over there. So focusing on D2 and where it's going to pop up is going to be very important that we get that right. It's one of the most important things that I think about with DART and the rail service. On the bus service, it's all about ridership. We're going to have better public transit if we're going to be able to attract HQ2s and the companies that want to come here. We have to be able to provide public transit. It's one of the biggest reasons that big corporations have bypassed us: public education opportunities and public transit. We have to get it right. It's super critical for the future. And like I said earlier, we all know that 20 or 40 years from now, cars will not be our future. We have to get ready now to get ready for that.
Thank you. All right, next question for Mr. Blewett. This is another audience question. It's from a District 14 resident, Ken Malcolmson with the Chamber. And Ken would like to get your thoughts on the city's new economic development plan. Mr. Blewett, you'll start.
Well, I just touched on it. We just passed it, and how it's really focused on the growth opportunities south of 30. It's a comprehensive plan that we're going to spend the next year basically tightening it up. We're going to create a task force that will give us community input, stakeholder input in terms of what it's going to look like. There's some really big, ambitious goals that are built into it. And I do believe if you don't have a goal that you're working towards, it's really hard to know if you're going to meet your objectives. So having this comprehensive plan, finally, after a decade or more of Chairman Tennell Atkins' tenacity of pushing on this, we finally have one. It is the beginning stages. It's not the end. This is the beginning of building an economic development plan that DDI, our stakeholders, business leaders have asked for. We need to provide a direction that all of us can point to and work together. And this is a good first start. So I'm very supportive of it. I'm very optimistic of it, because I think the future of Dallas isn't just going to be public transit and public education. It will be developing our land that has been left behind. And south of 30 is tremendous opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Ridley, same question.
I think the best feature of this new economic development policy is the notion of creating a nonprofit, public-private, local government corporation. This is following the example of Austin and other progressive cities that have created this sort of a hybrid entity to do things that the city can't do directly. And it will be able to drive development by combining the assets and the skills and talents of local enterprise as well as local government. And I think that is the most important development in this economic development policy that will serve to benefit our areas of disinvestment, where we have so many unserved neighborhoods and business districts, particularly in the southern sector, that need this kind of hybrid organization to bring true progress in terms of jobs, employment, ultimately commercial enterprises such as grocery stores and food deserts and livable neighborhoods.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move into the lightning round. If you've attended one of our forums before, you know we like to go into a series of questions where you'll have 10 seconds to answer or less. They're not intended to be long answers. So we're going to start with Mr. Ridley. What is your favorite restaurant in District 14?
I'd have to say Torelli's on Greenville.
And Mr. Blewett, favorite restaurant in District 14?
Well, Mr. Ridley and I can agree. I say it all the time, Torelli's. My wife and I sit at the bar.
Outstanding. All right, Mr. Blewett, favorite coffee shop in District 14?
Halcyon on Greenville Avenue.
Mr. Ridley, same question.
Ascension at the Crescent.
Okay, both good choices. Mr. Ridley, what's your favorite street in District 14?
I'd have to say Swiss Avenue. It's a street that I regularly walk on and enjoy the ambiance of the architecture and the trees. Mr.
Blewett, same question. Favorite street?
I'm gonna sell out my East Dallas neighborhoods, McKinney Avenue.
Great. Mr. Blewett, do you have a Dallas Public Library card, and what's the last item you checked out from the library, and what branch is it from?
I do not. My kids go to Lakewood all the time. We check out things there all the time, so I steal through my kids.
And Mr. Ridley, same question about the libraries.
I do have a library card. I've had one for over 20 years. I patronize the Lakewood Library. I go there mostly to read periodicals I don't subscribe to. Of course, I haven't been there in the last year because of the pandemic closure. So I'm anxious to go back.
Well, the libraries are now reopened, so you both can go back and visit. Mr. Ridley, how many parks or recreation centers have you visited in District 14?
Well, we only have one rec center, and that's at Exall Park. That's something that I think needs to be increased, but I visited just about every park in the district. I guess one of my favorites is Clyde Warren Park because of its diversity and multiple types of programming there.
And Mr. Blewett, same question. Parks and rec facilities.
Oh, I mean, mainly, all over. I mean, whether it's Greg's over on the other side, or I live a block from TT, so I'm at TT I jog around TT all the time. Well, when I do jog. I used to live right by Glencoe, so it's one of my favorite parks. Clyde Warren, I go through there. I go there for entertainment things every now and then. But in terms of just enjoying a park, it really is just TT or Glencoe, staying in my neighborhood.
Great. Mr. Blewett, question for you. Redistricting is coming up. Do you think downtown Dallas should be drawn entirely into one district?
I think that it's helpful for the business community to have one district represent the business community. I think if you carved it up into multiple districts, it would make it more complex. It's already under the 14-1 system, somewhat challenging with the 14 of us trying to represent our own districts the best way we can. But if you carved up the business district, I think it would be problematic. So I'm not in favor of that. But we'll have to see what the population numbers look like. I thought there might be massive changes, but now I'm hearing that the numbers might not be as big as we thought. But I do not want to carve up the business district, no.
And same question for you, Mr. Ridley.
Well, downtown is currently split, as you know, between District 14 and District 2. And I disagree with Mr. Blewett. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think as long as we have a cooperative spirit between our two districts, 2 and 14, and the councilmen representing those districts, that it actually amplifies the power of the business district in downtown on the city council, because they're not represented by just one councilman, but by 2, increasing the chances of getting ordinances through the city council through effective collaboration of our 2 districts.
Thank you. Mr. Ridley, setting aside what you'll do if you're elected, do you think city council positions should be full-time or part-time?
Well, I think effectively it is a full-time job. I've talked to people who have tried to work at the same time that they're on city council, and it's a struggle of 15 and 16-hour days. So I think to be really effective, it really helps to devote all of your working hours to city council, and that is what I intend to do. Whether it should be required, I'm not sure that we need to go that far. I think that's a personal decision, but I will make the decision to devote all of my working hours to city council.
And Mr. Blewett, same question for you.
Yeah, it's an easy one. I've been doing the job the last 2 years and it's full time. It's not even a question. So there's no way to do District 14. I think maybe some other councilmen could that didn't have 32,000 service requests, or the different development issues, or the entertainment issues, or the public safety issues, all the things that we deal with. This is definitely a time and a half full-time job, not even just 40 hours.
All right, Mr. Blewett, next question for you. Earlier this week, the chamber heard from OAC's Jennifer Scripps, so we want to ask an arts question. What's your favorite arts or cultural venue in the city? Doesn't have to be in District 14.
I kind of cheat because I have 7 kids, and my 4th daughter is my dancer. And so she thinks she's a good dancer, and she is going to Booker next year to dance. So I go anywhere she is dancing is where I go. But my favorite venue is something that I want to improve, which is the Frank Lloyd Wright Kalita Theater over off of Turtle Creek. It needs a lot of help. It's in our district. It's a fantastic venue. I look forward to post-COVID being able to support raising funds, renovating it. It's just an amazing architectural gem and an artistic masterpiece that I can't wait to bring back to life.
And same question, Mr. Ridley, same favorite venue for culture or arts in the city?
My favorite venue would be the Dallas Museum of Art. It's an organization that I am very happy to support, both with time and with money. I went through a 2-year training program at the DMA as a docent and served several years as a docent giving guided tours of the artworks in the museum. And it was always a source of mental replenishment to enter the museum and view creative, beautiful works of art.
All right, Mr. Ridley, what's the last trail in the city that you biked or walked on?
That would have to be White Rock Lake. I really enjoy the ambiance of the park and the lake, and frequently go over there for recreational walking.
Mr. Blewett, same question.
Yeah, I cheat every now and then around White Rock. It's District 9, but I trained for a marathon over there, so I do love White Rock. But it's an easy one, right? So I mean, it's the Clyde Warren, the Katy Trail. I mean, I'm up and down the Katy Trail. I love it. It's a little busy, but it's a fantastic part of our district and the city, an economic powerhouse, and it's a gem for activating that area. I still remember when it was a train track back when I was in college in the 80s and 90s. I can't believe what it is now.
All right, last question. Name for Mr. Blewett, name one endorsement from an individual residing in District 14 that you are particularly proud of.
You know, I have to, it's an easy one because in the first round, the general election, there were 3 of us, me, Mr. Ridley, and Elizabeth Viney. And Elizabeth Viney was her first time running. She ran primarily on a public safety message. And afterwards, she has supported and endorsed me. And I appreciate her effort. She did a great job. She got 22% of the vote. So you can't say that she wasn't successful speaking to the needs and wants of this district. She supports me, and I happily accept her support. And I'm proud of that endorsement.
All right, Mr. Ridley, same question.
I'd really have to split that between former U.S. Congressman John Bryant, who is endorsing me, and Jim Schutz, who to me is a deeply independent journalist who speaks his mind about the issues.
Thank you very much. All right, well, now we're going to allow each of you to close out, and we'll start with Mr. Ridley. You've got 1 minute.
As I said in my opening statement, experience matters in this race. It's critical that we have a representative of our district who is a neighborhood advocate and who doesn't just reflexively support and advocate for developers at the expense of neighborhoods. We've seen too much of that in the last 2 years. We need to have someone who is knowledgeable about development and zoning, who can strike the sensitive balance between the needs of maintaining and preserving our neighborhood quality of life and the needs of development to increase the amount of housing, particularly affordable housing in our district. I believe that I am the effective leader with the experience to build coalitions on the city council so that we can get the 8-vote majority that's necessary to get things accomplished. For example, in affordable housing, in economic development, in the areas of the city that are desperately crying out for jobs and for economic progress. And I also believe strongly that we need a representative who believes in open, transparent, and responsive city government. And I have a track record of being all of those things from my 8 years of service on the Plan Commission. And I ask sincerely for your vote in this runoff election.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley. Mr. Blewett, 1 minute to close.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. This election really is about the future versus the past. And I try very hard to think about, like I said, the young families that are moving in and the lifestyle that they want to have, that they will have in our neighborhoods. And so I believe in reasonable change. I believe that that's what the next generation wants. That's what the corporations want who want to relocate here. It is reasonable change. I don't live in the past. I think Mr. Ridley and some of his ideas were interesting a couple of decades ago. But when you talk to the young families, you talk to people who are moving here and what they want, it is connected neighborhoods. It is activities. It is safe neighborhoods. These are things I focus on because that's the future, and that's what the next generation wants. And that is what this election is all about. So I appreciate your support. I appreciate the opportunity. And I will close with that, the future versus the past.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Blewett and Mr. Ridley, for an excellent substantive forum discussing the issues. We appreciate you both being here and stepping up to run for this very important office. If you both would like to leave information on how to learn more about your campaigns or to contact you, please put that in the chat. We're happy to have you all do that. Thank you again to our candidates, to our sponsors, the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce, the League of Women Voters Dallas, Friends of the Dallas Public Library, Hotel Association in North Texas, Faith Commons, Dallas Breakfast Group, People Newspapers, and of course, Downtown Dallas, Inc. It's been a pleasure hosting all these candidate forums. Like I mentioned, this is the fourth one we've done this cycle. All of them will be available for viewing on the North Dallas Chamber's YouTube page if you'd like to watch any of them. Thanks again to the candidates, to all of you for participating, and please make sure to go out and vote. You can vote at any Dallas County location, regardless of where you reside. You can vote anywhere in Dallas County where there's an early voting location. Thanks again to everybody, and we are adjourned.